Shadow of the Erdtree is nearly here. So it's time to make the character I'll be taking in there for my first playthrough. In this video, I'll walk you through the game, showing you every item that I'm taking into the DLC, region by region, showing you where to get everything, and giving you some ideas for what stuff from the base game you may wish to have with you in the Land of Shadow. I want to do a melee build on my first playthrough, so I can try out all the brand new weapon classes, but I'll also be grabbing some stuff for caster builds, so I can get a decent hybrid build going if I want to. We're grabbing all of the sacred tiers, the vast majority of physic tiers, and every larval tier in the game. The build I'm taking into the DLC is, rather predictably, my parry build. So I started Bandit out of tradition, but feel free to go for Wretch or Vagabond if you really want to min-max. Since the items are the important part of this video and will be respeccing later anyway, I did this playthrough my way. A glass cannon parry build. If you want to follow it, I genuinely think it may be the best melee build in the game in terms of its damage output. If you don't want to struggle though, there's a far easier route you can follow. Since we started as Bandit, you know the rules. Straight to Margit for a scrap. Now follow my standard setup guide for all the early weapon upgrades. If you want an easier run, you can just grab Bloodhound's Fang and put all of your levels in your Vigor until 40, then start leveling your dex for a completely idiot-proof run. I, however, wanted to use my favourite weapon in the game. I've made this parry build many times with a Bleed Arcane setup with the Misericord, so today I'm doing Strength and the Executioner's Great Axe. You can farm this weapon by following this route from the lake-facing cliffs in Liurnia. But to make this doable at low level, head to the Third Church of Marika to kill the Scarab for the Sacred Blade Ash of War. By putting Sacred Blade on the dagger, you can easily kill the skeleton without having to grab the Golden Halberd and level it up, as I did the last time I used this weapon. Shout out to everyone who suggested this in the comments. To level up the axe, go to the Divine Tower in Caelid to grab the Newman's Rune by dropping down from the Grace. Use this to buy all the remaining smithing stones and level up your axe. And to finish our build setup, to the Redmane Castle Bridge and follow this route for Cragblade. Now we're all set for Limgrave. There's a surprising amount of really good items, talismans and tiers here. We'll start with two that we pick up in the setup guide, but are worth mentioning for just how good they are. First up, the Strength tier, giving us 10 extra points in Strength whenever we want it. I'm going to be grabbing all of the stat boosting tiers on this run, so that I can meet as many weapon requirements as possible when I need to. The second is the Golden Vow Ash of War. Although I predict I will have the slightly more powerful incantation version on most of my DLC builds, there is absolutely no reason not to pick this up and have it on a dagger for every build you make, for the extra damage and defense. Next, to the best combo for any strength build. Head south from the Third Church of Marika to the minor Erdtree for the green spill tier and the spike crack tier, then rides southwest to the Mistwood ruins for the axe talisman. The spike crack tier and the axe talisman are just the perfect combination for any big strength weapon, and it's always been amazing to me that FromSoft stuck them so close together at the start of the game. I've had these two on for the whole game on every strength build I've made on this channel, so they're an absolute must for DLC. I can't really see the green spill tier being particularly useful, but we've got it just in case. Another amazing talisman in Limgrave is the blue dancer charm. This is another talisman I'll have on all the way into the late game on any light load build. For builds like Dragonmaw, Pest Threads, Wing of Astal, Iron Balls or Starfists, this talisman adds massive damage. Now to the Erdtree avatar in Weeping Peninsula for the Opaline Bubble tier. While I suspect it won't be much use for a first playthrough, this one will certainly come in handy for those low level DLC runs, so I'd get in the habit of picking it up. And by jumping down the cliffs to the southeast of the Church of Pilgrimage, we can grab another stat boosting tier, the Faith Knot tier. Caelid at the Church of Ella sells the crafting kit and the crack pots, two must-haves. Now for a talisman that I haven't picked up since my first playthrough, but definitely want for Shadow of the Erdtree. The Invader Anastasia at the Smouldering Church drops the Sacred Scorpion charm. Holy damage is garbage in the base game, because basically every difficult boss is very resistant to it, but I suspect this will come in handy for the DLC. And another wildcard is the Arrow's Reach talisman. If you've watched any of the footage from the preview event, you'll probably have a good idea of what I'm thinking for this one. We'll be doing Celovus's questline later, so jump up the Spirit Spring from the Castle Morn Rampart Grace to grab the Starlight Shards. Then do the same thing from the Argyll Lake South Grace. An Ash of War that might be particularly useful in the DLC is Assassin's Gambit. This is sold by Banal after completing the second invasion quest in Volcano Manor. However, if you want it earlier, kill Banal, then take his bell bearing to the shop after joining Volcano Manor. And something that you might want to come back for later in your playthrough is the game's first larval tier. You can get it by killing this random enemy just northeast of Argyll Lake South Grace. I'm just buffing up here to save time, it's not that this enemy's particularly dangerous. Now to Stormver. There's a few useful bits here, so run through dodging all of the arrows perfectly and light the lift side chamber grace. Then run back through the courtyard to grab my second favourite weapon in the game. Run through the room with the grafted scion, out of the doorway to the right, through the stone sword key gate to grab the Misericord and the iron wet blade. From the Rampart Tower Grace, you can jump across to this building to grab the Claw Talisman. We want this in case the DLC has a new jump attack build. Before you head into Godric, run into the room on the left to grab some crack pots. I'll be grabbing more crack pots than I usually do on this run, but I'm not picking up all of them because I know I'll do what I always do and forget that consumables exist for the whole of the DLC. Not many weapons can kill Godric in Phase 1, even at this level, but the Great Axe does it easily. To finish off Limgrave, head up the Stormveil Tower to grab Godric's Great Rune. This is the only Great Rune I'm going to take into the DLC, as it might be useful for reaching weapon requirements to try stuff out. For a first playthrough, I don't think there's enough rune arcs in the game to account for all 18.5 inches of Mesmit, so I wouldn't particularly worry about this for your first run. Now to Liurnia. The first two big ones are the stat boosting tiers. Ride southwest from the Boar Prawn Shack to grab the Dex tier. Then drop down by Eg and ride north along the cliffs to pick up the Int tier. For more physic tiers, I went to both of the region's Erdtrees to kill the avatars. I don't think the exploding tier is going to be much use for bosses, but there's a chance there might be a Leyndell type skip, so I wanted to get it. Then to 3 absolute must-haves in the Holy, Lightning and Magic Shrouding tiers, dropped by the Avatar in the north. Another important one is grabbing the Smithing Stone Bell Bearing from the Raya Lucaria Crystal Caves. There's a couple of nice talismans in Liurnia. The first one is the Spear Talisman found in the Lakeside Crystal Cave. I think the only build I've ever picked this up for was the RL1 Rusted Anchor build. But with the new weapon types in Shadow of the Erdtree, I could see this one coming in handy. Next to the Stillwater Cave for the Winged Sword Talisman. This or the more powerful Rotten version are must-haves for any successive attack build. The speed of the throwing weapons seen in the first trailer makes me think that they might be particularly good for that one. Next up, the Jellyfish Shield. Again, I was thinking about the new throwing weapons when grabbing this, as it's typically one you use for ranged Faith or Int builds. Before heading into Caria Manor, I went to the Artist Shack to look at the painting. Loretta isn't really a problem, considering you can come back to her much later in the game, like I did for this run and usually do on others. By heading right out of her arena, you can find the painting location and grab yourself a larval tear, before speaking to Rani and Celivus, then giving Nefeli's potion to Gideon to set up the questline for later. There's 2 more larval tears in the area, one by the coffins at the village of the Albinorix Grace, and the second from killing this patrolling lobster northwest of the Boar Prawn Shack. Now into Raya Lucaria. I went straight to Red Wolf and pretty tricky fight. Just afterwards, by running up to this balcony in the courtyard, you can grab the Glintstone Whetblade. And Renala really isn't a problem for this build. Do your buffs after hitting the second sweeting to carry them through to phase 2. With 2 demigods down, I headed back to the round table to grab the 3rd talisman slot from Enya. And to fill it, I crept into Altus Plateau early to grab the Ritual Sword Talisman. While this talisman is probably the one that I've used the most out of any talisman in the game, I don't see it being much use in my first playthrough of the DLC while I'm face tanking absolutely everything. Brilliant for the base game, and I'll almost certainly be using it for DLC build guides. Now to our next area, Caelid. There's 2 avatars in Caelid, and it's worth beating both of them for the tier they drop. First to the far easier northwestern one for the Flame Shrouding tier and the Green Burst tier. Fire Shrouding is going to be amazing for any flame-based weapons, particularly some that we now know about. and the green burst is a no-brainer for spammy dex builds. Now for the tougher one, which I actually did do straight after Inaba so I could bully Radahn. The Stone Barb tier is an amazing addition to any posture breaking build. And since we'll likely be hitting our strength soft cap for the DLC and won't need the strength one, this and the Spike Crack tier will likely be my go-to setup for DLC bonking. And speaking of go-tos, I can't ever foresee me going into the DLC without the 15 faith needed to cast Flame Grant Me Strength. Grab this from the back of Fort Gale. Another must-have can be found in the abandoned cave. Jump into the first pool of rot and Bloodhound step your way through it. Then run through the rest of the dungeon to the boss. The Golden Scarab gives you 20% extra runes for every boss if you switch to it straight after they die. Another important thing to do in Caelid is start Millicent's questline. If you want to have a scrap with Commander Niall, feel free to do this as early as you like. I, however, came back much later so I could absolutely annihilate him. Give the needle to Gowry and quit out for a quick repair. Then give it to Millicent at the Church of the Plague. Speak to her there, then again at Gowry's shack. Then you're all set for the Leyndell portion of the quest. Finally, there's a random dude at the graveyard northwest of the Church of Dragon Communion who drops a larval tear. To finish off this region, here's what the Executioner's Great Axe does to Radahn with the Spike Crack Tear, Stone Barb and Crackblade. Speak to Alexander after the fight to start off his questline and finish up. Next up, Altus. The first thing to do here is head into the Altus tunnel for the second somber bell bearing. Next up is grabbing the Golden Vow incantation by riding across the battlefield from the Bridge of Iniquity. I imagine I'll be using this spell for the DLC on pretty much every character. Ride north from the Altus Highway Grace to drop down and grab the Amber Starlight for Celibus. You can now go back to him, check out his dungeon, exhaust his dialogue, and grab the Magic Scorpion charm. Then up to Volcano Manor. Speak to Tanith, then head back to the Round Table to buy Assassin's Gambit. Run into Noble's Arena and realise that you're completely unprepared. Then bully him anyway. The two main pickups in this dungeon are the Dagger Talisman. You can reach this by dropping down after the Stonesword Keygate. Then when you hit the bottom, run back into this room and grab Royal Knight's Resolve in front of the fireplace. For Rykard, I used the Lance in the right hand, Serpent Hunter in the left, and spammed crouching L1s for both phases. Buffing after phase 1 makes this fight go by pretty quickly. While we're in Mount Gelmir, head to the Seathwater Terminus and up into Fort Lyde to grab the Magic Scorpion Charm. Then into the lava to speak to Alexander. Now to the Second Church of Marika to kill Eleonora for the Purifying Tear and a Sacred Tear. Then to the Stormcaller's Church for another. Then head to the Shaded Castle to grab the Valkyrie's prosthesis to start the Altus portion of Millicent's questline. Give the prosthesis to her at the Erdtree Gazing Hill, then ride past the Apostle and quit out for an easy stealth kill. Now I want the prosthesis more than the Rotten Wing Sword for the DLC, and you can't have both, so I convinced Millicent to hand it over. After this, you can pick up the Phlox Canvas Talisman from Gowrie. Then head to these 2 locations for 2 more enemies carrying larval tears. Here's what the Executioner's Great Axe does to a tree sentinel, with only enough levels to meet the weapon's requirements. Kill the Avatar in the Capital Avenue for the extra Lord's Rune. Then through the city to the Colosseum for 2 things I want for the DLC. The Ritual Shield Talisman will come in super handy for defense on a first playthrough. I also grabbed the Starfist in case I get particularly bored with the Godskin Trio fight in the DLC. That being said, I've done quite a few runs with the Starfists and Iron Balls, and I genuinely think that the Executioner's Great Axe is the only physical damage weapon that gives them a run for their money. It's so good. Now for the shortest section of the run, the Mountaintops of the Giants. Right through the Zamor ruins to grab the Smithing Bell-Bearing 3. Bait the Golem by the Freezing Lake Grace into hitting this statue for some Smithing 7s. Then through the fog, past Borealis, to pick up the Somber Bell-Bearing 3 outside the first church, the Sacred Tear inside it, then the Smithing 7s on the cliff nearby. And an unusual tier I don't often grab is the Crimson Whirl Bubble tier. This can come in handy for dodging terrible attacks like Elden Stars, so I want to have this in my back pocket for DLC bosses. And finally for this area, the Ancient Smithing from the Giant Skull. I'm not too concerned with grabbing all of the max weapon upgrades, as I'm far more likely to level everything to plus 24 or plus 9 in the DLC. Fire Giant is a piece of cake with this weapon, with Cragblade guaranteeing at least 2 staggers. Now for a break from the main story. It's time to head underground. The only thing I really want from these areas, for Shadow of the Erdtree, is the larval tears. There's one in this building, just off of the Nokron courtyard. One in this gazebo before the boss, and 2 drop from the Mimic Tear. Jump down into the Night's Sacred Ground, grabbing the black wet blade as you go. Then killing our first giant bull for another larval tear. In the lower part of this area, in the Seafra riverbank, you can head into this room with the flowers and jump up the lamps to reach this merchant who sells another. Now into the other underground area, Angel River and Noxtella. Here we need to kill the other 3 bulls in the area for 3 more larval tears. There's a couple of things we need to grab in Farum Azula. You can pick up the Ancient Dragon prayer book in case there's a lightning weak DLC boss you wish to decimate, but the more important is the Somber Bellbearing 4, right next to the Grace. I'll be farming all of my upgrade materials for the DLC as it's just easier, but there's a whole ton of smithing and somber stones in Farum if you don't want to. For Godskin, since I'm on my favourite build, I did a parry fight rather than the cheese. The damage on this weapon means you can be super aggressive if you're careful about it. Stand behind the pillars to avoid the rolling attack, and if it all goes wrong, chuck a throwing knife at the wall instead of healing, then nearly have an incident. In the next area, you can grab another ancient smithing stone by heading up the spiral staircase and jumping from this collapsed column onto the platform. Grab the Somber 10 by the dragon, then the final Somber Bell Bearing from the room just before the lift. You might want to come through this area backwards for this one, as it's a little easier. Head up to see our main man on the rooftop, do a little sparring with him, then take the shard he hands you, while he explains that he's off to the Shadowlands. And if you think that this much more dangerous, much more tanky Sentinel isn't going to get bullied as hard as the Leyndell one, well... Now for Beast and Malekith, and I had an absolute shocker on Beast. I was gonna just quit out and try again, as I went in and immediately started face tanking hits and all of my buffs run out. But instead, I thought I'd show you what this weapon does to Malekith, even in the worst case scenario. At any point after Malekith, you can run backwards from the Forbidden Lands into the Ashen capital and use Assassin's Gambit to grab the Erdtree's favour +2. For the style points on Godfrey, get his health down to the stomp, then let his posture recover while he does it for a flashy Horaloo. For Radabeast, neither of them are quite scripted, but with this setup, they're about as easy as it gets without that. With the help of some incredibly lucky RNG, I had a seriously good Elden Beast. To get to the next area, we need to beat Nile. And I'm just going to let this one play. In the snowfields, I headed east from Ordner Town to kill the putrid avatar for the thorny cracked tear. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything from the previews, but my god, I'm going to be using this. And here in the snowfields, we have our final larval tear. Now, this one is optional, as if you're anything like me and find the thought of murdering an enemy that is stuck in the ground and can't fight back not very honourable, you can leave him alone, as I did. Now to the Haligtree. As you're running through, make sure you grab the ancient dragon smithing by the Mistbegone. Loretta is a pretty hard boss. Unless you're running this build, in which case she's just another tree sentinel that we can stun lock to death. On the way to Malenia, I ran across the branches and dropped down through the roof to grab the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman, which is almost certainly going to get some serious use in Shadow of the Erdtree. And that's really it for this build and playthrough. Malenia gets absolutely bullied by this weapon on a parry build. 3 parries, a riposte, and a charge as she stands up is all you need. Just by hitting Plassey with super safe R1s, you can still get staggers to deal big damage with that massive riposte. And Moog will die before he even gets to phase 2. Make sure you grab the ancient somber stone in the chest outside his arena. Now, the most important part of this DLC build is what I did right at the end. I grabbed the Sacred Relic Sword from Enya and leveled it to +9. Respect with 23 dex and 99 faith, put on something to listen to, and farmed the Mogwin's Palace Albinaurix for a bit. For this video, I got enough for about 10 Sombers and 10 Smithings. But between now and the DLC, I'll be coming back here every now and again to farm some more runes for weapon upgrades, as I plan to use absolutely everything I find in the Land of Shadow. And finally, what is simultaneously the least and most important part: levels. After watching the videos about the DLC preview event, I've decided I'm going to do my first playthrough at level 150. As firstly, it seems to be From Software's recommended level based on that event. But secondly, and more importantly, I want enough levels to try out a lot of different weapons. These are the stats I'm going to start with, but to be honest, I think that 60 Vigor will be the only stat that survives the first respec. I'm so incredibly excited to jump into Shadow of the Erdtree and get lost in another From Software open world. If you want to see more parry guides, build guides, and much more in Shadow of the Erdtree, subscribe to the channel. For now though, as always, thanks for watching. See you soon.